Now I invite Giorgia to make her presentation. Thank you again, Giorgia, for your great work in this project, but we are working together on many other issues, and since some year, the two groups, so we are the group of urban planning, and Giorgia and her group represent more the building technology experts. We are working together on this field, also in cooperating with municipalities in order to find this balance between the urban scale and the building scale. So we are also experimenting some research by working with a couple of municipalities that are renovating their urban plan now according to the regional law. And it's really, I think, a great way of putting together the different expertise, the different fields, in trying to find a common solution which is useful for the city and for the citizens mainly. So thank you, George, and please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Simona. It's very nice to see you here today for the first time after more than 1 year. I will present you. We have 2 presentations, let's say me and Lorenzo today, not really about the contents of the work package about the expeditious methods today, but today we want to show you something more about our case study, our pilot case in Piazza Puntone, and tomorrow instead you will see many other informations about the expeditious methods we are working on. So in this first presentation, I want to introduce you the building fabric of the historic center of Bologna with an overview of the construction techniques and the typological characteristics of the buildings and of the building complexes that characterize our city. The aim is to define the common characteristics of these buildings because they are the base for the Adriseismic project, and we are doing this presentation today because I will show you how the case study we have chosen about Piazza Puntone collects most of these buildings about building types and construction types. So you will understand why we have chosen this place for our case study, because it is really representative of the seismic approach to be taken on the built heritage of the city of Bologna. Let's start from afar. When Bologna in Roman times was called Bononia. I won't talk you about the history of the city, but I will talk you about the building that characterized the city in many centuries. So today Bologna still reveals in the historic center remains of the Roman era, some architectural structures, some traces of ancient streets. The aqueduct is still present, and the basements of some public and private buildings. But we know how Bologna was built, even if these are only little remains of the city. Bologna was built with the typical layout of Roman cities, so with sparse but widespread housing fabric, with wide open spaces next to buildings, with simple construction techniques, so with foundation made of dry pebbles or bound with clay, elevation in raw earth, wood or raw clay bricks with large layers of plaster. These materials has not a long life because they are natural materials. That's why Bologna today does not have many remains of this era in its buildings. In this image, we can see the conformation of the city. The historic center is the one inside the blue and red line. The part dating back to the Roman era is the area within the brown line. So you can see it is very small related to the actual one. And only few elements of this period remain within the brown area. And they have to be considered only as archaeological finds because they are only little parts of specialistic buildings. The first buildings define the urban fabric as we still see it today. That's back to the early Middle Ages instead. And they are located between the green and the brown line in this image. From the 10th century, rectangular lots began to be arranged along the radial roads. The radial roads, we call them the one, can you see the mouse? No. The one that you see are going with an inclined way out from the brown line. So that's the area related to the Middle Ages. They are Via Santo Stefano, Strada Maggiore, Via Castiglione. Probably you have seen them during your stay. So these rectangular lots hosted houses that were rented out by convents. They are all very similar, one to the other. And the lot had an average of about 5.5 meters in the short side, and the short side was on the street, was facing on the street, and about 15 meters in depth, so going inside, let's say perpendicular to the street. The lot hosted a building which occupied the entire width of the lot and an internal courtyard in the back of the building. The building organization was very simple, with a room on the street that was dedicated to shops and another room behind which led to the courtyard. In the later centuries, the area within the green line was also saturated, so new buildings were not more possible in that area, and expansions began outside it, so within the red and blue line. Here, the building type was the same for residential buildings, but lots were longer. So in the High Middle Ages, an intense urban planning operation began in this expansion area. The lot kept the same width, so let's say about 5.5 meters, but get longer in the long dimension. Here, the so-called terraced building were realized with porticoes, following the same scheme. So with an entrance on the main street, on the main facade, and a path inside to reach the courtyard. The building occupied the first part of the lot, the part on the street, of course, and occupied half or 1/3 of the interior area of the lot. The structural type was similar than the previous one and was characterized by shared walls on the borders, which were in common with the next buildings, with the closed buildings. They had a timber load-bearing framework with inclined struts. Infills were in reused bricks or pebbles bound with lime or mud and plasters. The wood was also used for the staircase and for the portico. Portico, as you know, is one of the main features of local constructions. Here we can see some images from historical archives, graphic reconstructions and pictures of buildings that are still present in the historic center today. testifying the process that led to the definition of the portico in its mature form, because it is a long history also. Portico has a long history inside our building types, because it starts as something that covers the entrance of the shops that were behind along the street, and then becomes also an elevation for the building, an expansion for the buildings on the street, as you can see in these pictures. The construction of porticos became mandatory in the Middle Ages in Bologna, because it was also regulated by the municipal statutes that make the portico a mandatory element in the building construction, because it was very useful in climatic conditions, and it was used as an expansion of the shop area at the ground floor. There were some rules in the construction of porticos, because they had to have a minimum height of 3 meters and a width of the local 7 feet, which is 2 meters and 65 centimeters. The portico had to be built in new houses, dating back to this period, so about the 13th, 14th century, and it was a private space for public use. So also today, portico has a private management by the owner of the building, but is dedicated only, especially for public use on streets. The structure was characterized by a timber frame with a base in stone. The local stone is selenite. It's a gray stone. You will see it in many buildings of the city, for the basements especially. But in 1363, the use of bricks was imposed for pillars. So by the half of the 14th century, it was necessary to build new porticos with brick pillars and not with wood ones. So only few buildings remain today with these structures, because they have been substituted. But in the historic center, today we can find also other traces of this type of structures inside buildings during interventions, restoring intervention. There are testimonies of these medieval terraced houses, because as we can see in this previous presentation, some timber porticos have been preserved, but also during restoration intervention, some timber elements have been brought to light. Throughout the centuries, the infills were substituted with not reused elements, but with new brick masonry. First in the longitudinal walls, and then in all the surfaces. Wooden pillars, as I said, were replaced with brick pillars. Thanks to these modifications, buildings dating back to 6 or 7 centuries ago have come down to us, have arrived to us in the general conformation that we still see them today. So in this slide, you can see which was the procedure. So passing from the timber portico to the brick one, elevating the building in its height, with not only 2 floors as it was in their origin, but with more than 2 floors, and the realization of brick facades. This project involved the replacement of these pillars with brick ones, super elevation, as I was saying, the construction of new parts of the building in the courtyards. So the building did not remain only on the part of the lot on the street, facing on the street, but construction continued also inside the courtyard. So today we can find a very dense, a very compact situation in the historic center because of these expansions. And many buildings suffered another transformation, which was the unification of several buildings into a single block. So not only these, let's say, short facades with the width of 5.5 meters, but facades became longer. They united more than one building under the same facade. But inside we can find different levels of floors, for example, different conformation of the openings, but a unique facade, let's say, on the street. An in-depth study of these typological schemes was carried out by the municipality of Bologna in 1973 with the aim of restoring some neighborhoods and reproposing the same building type also for new buildings in the historic center. In this case, this was applied in these sectors you see in the plan. These were restoration intervention or rebuilding intervention, quindi reconstruction interventions. And in the case of reconstruction, the vertical structures were preserved, mainly preserved, let's say, in load-bearing masonry, but they were not used timber floors, but hollow brick floors with cement floors. And porticos often had reinforced concrete pillars instead of brick pillars. So today, this is the common situation we can find in the historic centers, not only of Bologna, but of all the city belonging to the province of Bologna, with this very dense construction. Oops, sorry. Characterized by this building type that suffered this transformation during the last centuries. Together with this building type, so the so-called terraced buildings, Bologna is also known for its palaces. There are about 60 palaces inside the historic center of Bologna. Here in the map, you can see some points of the main one, but really there are 60 in the historic center. And they have an high architectural and artistic value. Probably they are less known than towers and porticos, which are the main features of local constructions, but they are really relevant buildings, and they have a very high number. They are mainly located in the expansion area we were talking about in the medieval time, and not in the Roman core, let's say, because here the fabric was too dense and it was not possible to build these huge buildings because many times they are very big. In Bologna, palaces refer to three main models. The Bolognese one, with gothic influences, which always have a portico, quindi with brick pillars and brick facades, often left exposed, so on site. Or with a particular local technique for finishing, which is called sagramatura, which gives the surface a clay appearance. Palazzo Fava is one of the most representative palaces of this type. It is in the core of the city. It hosts a museum, actually. Then another model is the Florentine one, which is often without portico, but portico can be present inside the building if there is a courtyard, as you can see here. The facade on the street is characterized by these ashlar decorations imitating stones. But this is the courtyard of the same palace. You see, inside it has a Bolognese style instead of the Florentine one. The last model is the Roman one with portico many times and stone decorations, often enriched with beautiful sculptures on the facades. Palazzo Davia Bargellini is one of the most representative palaces of this type inside the city in the expansion area of the medieval period. All these palaces have common features by the construction point of view. They have large halls. Often they have majestic stairways, as the one we were seeing in Palazzo Davia. Often there is an internal courtyard, sometimes with arcades, as I was showing you. About materials, they are made with load-bearing masonry, brick masonry, sometimes with a selenite basement. Floors are made of wood. They have ceiling coffers and decorations, and the roofs are all made with trusses because these large halls require this type of solution for roofing. In the city of Bologna, there are also about 60 churches. But we won't talk about churches because this is another theme, let's say, probably far from the aim of our project. But we can talk about convents because convents have a similar layout to palaces. And many times convents are annexed to these 60 churches in the city. In recent periods, many convents have been abandoned and are today used as schools, museums, or public buildings. So they have, let's say, a second life, which is close to the aim of this project. This is a typical scheme of one of the convents inside the city. It's the convent of San Francesco, the church you were seeing in the first presentation by Professor Ceccarelli. Also, convents have common features in the city. They have generally smaller rooms than palaces, but with the same layout, let's say. They have an internal courtyard with arcades, also in this case. They are built with brick masonry, with timber floors and roofs, but in this case, trusses are less used than palaces because rooms are smaller, so sometimes they are not needed, but covers are made with purlins. Decoration are simpler than palaces, one because of the use, the function of the building, of course. The historic urban fabric remained unchanged in terms of construction techniques until the 19th century, when new materials were introduced. So first metal materials, so steel and iron, and then of course reinforced concrete. This is a typical scheme of a building realized in the 19th century. And in this period, large and high buildings started to replace parts of the historic fabrics, which were demolished and rebuilt with this new type of buildings used for commercial activities and for residential function. In the first period, so about the end of the 19th century, the facades of these buildings recalled the local medial features of palaces, as you can see. So they were in this particular style that we call eclectic one. Vertical structure was still made up of load-bearing masonry walls using only brick in this period, with variable thicknesses, of course. And for horizontal structures, the most common materials, the most common solution were brick walls, wooden floors, and floors with iron elements and brick walls, which became very common in this period at the beginning of the 19th century. Roofs were mainly still in wood, so mainly used wood also in this period. At the beginning of the 20th century, we see the introduction of reinforced concrete in the local construction. And this is the first building in the area of Bologna. Really, it is outside the city center. It's not in the city. It is in the neighborhoods, but it dates back to the first year of the 20th century. And this is the first building, the first local building, have all the floors in reinforced concrete with a particular system called NBIC system. Constructions were made in the same way as the previous period, so with the brick masonry walls. But reinforced concrete started to be used for horizontal structures and for roofs. In this period, floors were made with slabs, so entire floors made of reinforced concrete with no other element in addition. In the first years of the first decade of the 20th century, reinforced concrete became also let's say, the main material for vertical structures also. This is, in this picture, you can see the first building inside the city, in this case, because it was in Via Rivareno, so just outside the Roman area. It was the old Royal Tobacco Factory in Bologna, and it had this reinforced concrete frame, the blue one in the picture. It was a reinforced concrete frame, and the red one, the pink one in the picture, are masonry structures. So there is a deep combination in this first 20 years of the 20th century between main structures made with reinforced concrete and an external structure made of masonry, brick masonry. Of course, also floors were made with reinforced concrete. And these are a few pictures inside this building. At the floor under the roof and the lower floor, showing how this construction solution permitted to have large spaces without any support inside. So have to have a large space to be used for the tobacco activities. This building does not exist anymore, unfortunately. It was demolished after the Second World War. Between the 20 and the 30, architecture inspired to modern movement began to spread also in Italy and, of course, also in Bologna. The reinforced concrete structure was one of the expedients to overcome the previous historicism in architecture. Mixed construction with reinforced concrete structure and bricks continued in the 30s also. And the architects proposed a complex and innovative solution, but maintaining a masonry nature for buildings. So with small openings, as you can see in the picture, vertically aligned, using concrete just to have huge spaces inside the building. Finally, in the 30s, this approach became stronger also in the city of Bologna. And just outside the historic center, the most representative building following this approach is the Faculty of Engineering. You have seen it also in the presentation by Professor Ceccarelli, but we are very proud of this building, so we want to show it more and more and more. And you will see it today, because tomorrow you will be there, so you will have the opportunity to see it in person. In the historic center, the same principle were applied. New modern buildings occupied the urban voids, previous urban voids, or spaces that were subject of demolitions of the historic fabric. Many times they are built in adherence, so very close to the masonry ones, and this can be a problem in their structural behavior. Until now, the reinforced concrete frame construction type has not undergone significant changes since its definition at the beginning of the 20th century, as I showed you. The changes involved only the replacement of reinforced concrete slabs with hollow brick floors, so floors using brick and concrete, and after with prefabricated ones. Also, we can see the replacement of the solid masonry, so bricks, full bricks, let's say, with hollow bricks, so bricks having voids in their mass. So coming to conclusion, after this focus, you can understand why the case study of Piazza Pontoni is highly representative of the local urban fabric for us. In fact, it includes different building types which correspond to the prevailing ones in our city. Both for ancient masonry structures and modern reinforced concrete structures, because we have buildings, residential buildings referring to the ancient terraced houses type. We have a palace, which is Palazzo Poggi. We are inside it now. We have buildings using masonry solution built in the 30s, and we have reinforced concrete buildings with a complete frame. So that's why we have chosen this case, because it is really representative of all the types that we can find in our city.